So one of the most common questions that people ask me is how many credit cards should I have? And this is a tough question to answer because the number of cards that you have is a very personal thing and it really just depends on your habits and your life. There's not going to be one clear answer, but I do think that when you start to ask yourself a series of very important questions that we're gonna go through here in this video, you'll be able to tell a little bit easier whether you should have maybe 1 to 4 credit cards, 15 to 20, or even no credit cards at all. Now to start off here, what if I told you that I myself have 9 credit cards right now? What is your immediate first reaction to hearing that number without even thinking whether you've seen me before here on YouTube or not? Would you say, Daniel, that's too many, man. You're gonna get in trouble and then miss a payment and end up in credit card debt? Or would you say, Daniel, you make videos here on YouTube and there's other YouTubers out there that have way more cards than that when you don't even have 10 yet? Well, whatever you would say to that actually doesn't matter to me at all because I know myself and I know that 9 credit cards at this exact moment is perfect for me and my situation with my slow and steady approach to getting credit cards strategically over time, and I think this is the best approach for anyone out there. As time continues to go on, the number of credit cards that I have will keep increasing, but not because it has to. It'll keep increasing because I want it to and because it makes sense for me and my situation as I continue to maximize the value and the benefits that I get out of credit cards. Now, I'll explain my own personal thought process behind how many credit cards I should have later on in this video, but first, let's go ahead and answer some questions that we need to be asking ourselves regarding what should be our top priority when it comes to credit cards, and that is our financial health. So make sure to go ahead and subscribe down below to help support free content here on this channel. But the first question that you need to be asking yourself is, am I likely to overspend on a credit card? And the second question is, am I likely to miss a payment or carry a balance? Now, if you answered yes to either one of those questions, or if you have a history of doing those things in the past, then right now I suggest that at most you only have 1 credit card, at least until you can take the time to really get comfortable with learning how to use a credit card the right way. But if you are really out of control with overspending, missing payments, and especially carrying a credit card balance, then I might even suggest that you have 0 credit cards right now if it's going to be too tempting to use credit cards to finance your life. And I've said this before, but I'm not calling anybody out for doing any of these things. Everyone has their own financial situation and their own difficulties, so it really doesn't matter if using credit cards the wrong way is directly your fault or if it's actually just due to your challenging circumstances or something like that. You just need to really take a deep look at yourself. The reality is that credit card debt comes at the cost of paying insanely high interest rates, and it can be very tough to dig yourself out of this debt. So really, I just recommend that you think twice before carrying any credit card balance at all. Overspending can be a very big threat to credit card users as well because many people will not make that full connection that whatever they spend on that credit card, they have to pay that amount back eventually. So the best habit for successful credit card users is to treat your credit card like cash or like a debit card and only use that credit card to pay for something if you already know that you have money set aside in a separate bank account. That way you could pay off that credit card balance immediately if you want to. But if you're honest with yourself and you don't overspend, you don't miss payments, and you don't carry a balance, then congrats. We can now move on to the next 2 questions that we should answer to help you determine, generally speaking, the number of credit cards that should be right for you. And by the way, if you only want to have 1 credit card because that's all that you want to manage, then that's absolutely fine because having 1 credit card will actually still help with your credit score in terms of credit mix and on-time payment history. But I think that for many people out there, having just slightly more than 1 credit card actually could be a little bit better if you think that you can manage it. Now, these next 2 questions are going to be more focused on income and spending. And again, spending is very important to understand because overspending is really a problem for many people out there, whether they realize it or not. And if you understand what your typical monthly expenses are, especially the expenses that you will put on a credit card, then you'll see that by having more than 1 credit card, you actually can help your credit score quite a bit. So I'll explain that in more detail in just a minute here. So the third question to ask yourself is, what is my income? And the fourth question to ask is, what are my typical monthly expenses? Your income is not going to directly affect your credit score, but it can affect the credit limits that you're given, which in turn can then affect your credit score. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, or if you have a lower income, that's okay, but credit card issuers might see this and then offer you lower credit limits compared to what they might offer somebody else that has higher income. They just want to make sure that you have the capacity to pay back any amounts that you spend on that credit card. So the lower credit limits make sense here because they're issuing these credit cards to millions of people, so they needed some way to measure this. And what you'll notice is that even if you do have a few credit cards with decent credit limits, if your income remains the same and then you go ahead and apply for more credit cards and get approved, with each additional newer credit card, you might see lower and lower credit limits. And that's just because they don't want your total available credit limits to be too high relative to your income. Again, this is all generally speaking, and everyone's situation is going to be different, but as your income starts to increase over time, you'll start to be able to see some higher credit limits on both new and existing credit card accounts. But more importantly to consider here are your typical monthly expenses, especially things that you will use a credit card for, like gas, groceries, and other things like that. So I like to recommend some form of budgeting just so that people can become more self-aware of all their income versus their expenses. You could use the simple method that I use, which I made a previous video about that I'll link down in the description below, or you can just write stuff down on a piece of paper just to get a general understanding of where your money is coming from and where your money is going out to. But to explain why you might want to have a few more credit cards and not just one, let's say that you spend $1,000 per month on your one credit card that you have, and that one credit card has a credit limit of $2,500. Well, one of the biggest factors that impacts about 30% of your credit score is credit utilization, which simply looks at the balances on your credit cards divided by the credit limits on those cards. And credit utilization is looked at for each individual credit card as well as across all of your credit cards combined if you have more than one. So in this case, credit utilization is going to be 40% for this one card and 40% overall, which is a little bit too high because generally it's recommended that you keep utilization as low as possible. It's recommended that you keep utilization below 30%, but ideally below 10% if you can, because that is basically just going to show that you're responsible with not overusing the amount of credit that you've been given. So the argument here is that if you only have one credit card, then you may be more likely to have a higher credit utilization, which could hurt your credit score if you're not careful. Now you can always just pay off your credit card balance in full, or at least pay off a large portion of your credit card balance before the statement closing date. That way the balance and the credit utilization that gets reported to the credit bureaus is not too high. But you can also just get another 2 to 3 credit cards to help with this as well, which is what I prefer to do for a couple of reasons. First, getting more credit cards will give you additional credit limits on each one of those cards. So for that previous example, let's say that you still spend the same $1,000 per month on your credit cards, but then let's also say that you got 2 additional credit cards, one with a credit limit of $3,000 and another with a credit limit of $5,000. Then to keep things simple, let's say that you're able to spread out that $1,000 of spending across all 3 cards equally. So instead of spending $1,000 on one card with a $2,500 limit, you're now spending $333 on 3 separate cards, each with different credit limits. Now your credit utilization is much lower than 40% on each one of those 3 individual credit cards, and that utilization is also better on a combined overall basis because you're taking $1,000 of balances on those credit cards and dividing it by now $10,500 of credit limits, which is going to give you a credit utilization overall of 9.5%. And the second reason why I like having at least a few credit cards instead of just one is because if I get the right credit cards, I can really maximize the amount of points and cash back that I get from my everyday spending across different spending categories. So maybe I have one credit card that gets me 5% back on gas, and then another credit card that gets me 5% back on groceries, and then a third credit card that gets me 1.5 to 2% back on everything from miscellaneous expenses. There's a lot of ways to go about this, but the return that you get from your credit card spending within your everyday spending habits is going to be directly related to the amount of spending that you do. So keep that in mind. If your income is lower and therefore your expenses are lower as well, don't focus too much on credit card earning from your everyday spending. Just pick the right cards for you so that you're maximizing your potential, but focus more of your time and energy on increasing your income over time. But if your income is already high, or maybe it's increasing and so are your expenses, then definitely make sure that you pick out the right credit cards to use, because if you don't, then you could be leaving a ton of value on the table. And this includes if you run a business. So if you're spending money each month on things like inventory, advertising, shipping, things like that, that is going to be very valuable for you to have a business credit card, and the right business credit card, because I think there's a huge opportunity out there for business owners to earn a lot of cash back or a lot of points if they use those business credit cards strategically. I also wanted to mention that welcome bonuses are generally where you're going to get the most value from your credit cards. So make sure that if you're applying for any new cards in the future, whether it's a business card or a personal card, make sure you go ahead and apply for ones that have generous welcome bonus offers at the time that you apply, with minimum spend requirements that are easy for you to reach. I'll have some links down below if you want to learn more about some of these offers, so go check that out after watching this video if you're interested. But to summarize what we've talked about so far here, I think that having between maybe 2 to 4 credit cards is really going to be the sweet spot for most people to help with their credit score, to help with utilization and payment history as they make on-time and in full payments over the years. This number of credit cards can also allow you to maximize the amount of rewards that you're getting from your everyday spending habits, again, as long as you're using that credit card like a debit card and not overspending. For some other people, you might even be willing to go a little bit higher than 4 credit cards as you see different credit card offers out there that make sense for you and your situation. So as long as you're willing to do a little bit of extra research to find those right credit card offers for you, then that 2 to 4 credit card number could easily turn into 6 to 8 credit cards. But next, let's get into some of the fun stuff here where other people might be willing to get into the double-digit credit card range. Now, there's no true upper limit as to how many credit cards is actually too many if you're worried about negatively impacting your credit score, as long as you're just not applying for too many credit cards too quickly. But what I'm going to say next here should really be your main takeaway after watching this video if you learn nothing else. So if you want to get more and more credit cards as time goes on and you don't really have an upper limit as to how many credit cards is too many, just like me, then the one thing that you need to remember is to be patient. Do not rush your credit card applications. One of the general themes here on my channel when it comes to anything related to personal finance, including credit cards, is that there's a big emphasis on the word personal. We're all different and we all have different risk tolerances and organizational skills when it comes to things related to our money. So by being patient with your credit card applications, as you start to add more and more cards and you get above that 10 credit card number, you're going to start to find out what your true upper limit is for yourself, because eventually you'll reach this point where all the benefits and all the value that you get from credit cards is not worth all the hassle that it takes to manage those cards. The last thing that you want to do is get ahead of yourself and then start to overspend just to reach a minimum spend requirement for a welcome bonus, or you forget to make a minimum payment and then that starts to affect your credit score negatively. So that's why I have 9 credit cards right now, because that's a lot to some people, but it's not that much to others that maybe have 30 or 40 credit cards, but I'm just simply being patient. At this point, the 2 major factors affecting my credit score are completely under control. So with credit utilization, I have over $40,000 in combined credit limits, so that credit utilization is always consistently low with my monthly spending on my credit cards. And then payment history is just 100% for me because I've never missed a payment on my credit cards. I always pay them off on time and in full every single month, and I have systems in place so that I'll never miss a payment in the future as well. So as I add some new credit cards and get above 10, 15, or 20 cards over the coming years, I'm really only going to be adding cards that strategically make sense for me and add value and benefits to my life. So that's why I like to recommend a similar approach for a lot of people out there, because many times I'll see people comment on my videos saying that they just got approved for one credit card and now they want to go ahead and apply for another and another and another. And that can work for some people, but I think that the best results from anything in life come from having a patient long-term view. That way the compounding effect can take place. Sure, you might not earn welcome bonuses as quickly, but the compounding effect will take place in many other ways related to your knowledge of your credit cards, knowledge of your spending habits, how well you can redeem your points to maximize the value for travel, and other things like that. If you just rush into it and focus too much on the short term, you can actually damage a lot of your longer term value with credit cards without even realizing it. And this is something that so many people are guilty of, and I see happen so much in the world of credit cards, but no one else out there is really talking about it, so I wanted to talk about it here in this video. So hopefully this video can get seen by more people, and if you enjoyed anything that I've talked about here so far, make sure to go ahead and drop a like down below. That way YouTube knows that this video is going to be useful for other people to watch as well. And also let me know down in the comment section below how many credit cards you have right now and what you think, with your best guess, is going to be your upper limit for credit cards in the future. Now, a few quick final but important considerations when it comes to how many credit cards you should have as well. Make sure you go ahead and do some research on the different credit card issuers, because each issuer is going to have different rules when it comes to how many credit cards you can hold from them, how many credit cards you can apply for over a certain period of time, and other things like that. Chase has their famous 524 rule, which I've talked about in plenty of other videos, but other issuers have other rules as well. So just do a quick Google search. Make sure you familiarize yourself with these things because it will affect the number of credit cards you can have in the short term. Also, make sure to consider things like hard inquiries and age of credit when you're applying for new credit cards. Getting new credit cards is usually going to cause your credit score to drop by a few points, at least in the short term, as those hard inquiries start to show up on your credit report and as that new credit card account kind of drags down the average age of your credit history just a little bit. These things are not going to have as big of an impact as you become more experienced with your credit and have a longer credit history, but if you're newer to credit, then these are definitely things to be aware of. If you're thinking of applying for any type of loan in the near future, like maybe a mortgage or a car loan or anything like that, then make sure you're also aware that applying for credit cards, like I said, is going to bring down your credit score just a bit in the short term. So that could cause you to have higher interest rates on those types of loans that you're applying for, and a higher interest rate could cost you tens of thousands of dollars in interest over the life of that loan. So again, one more thing to be aware of when applying for new cards. And lastly, the number of credit cards that you should have is going to be tied to how much work you're willing to put into managing these credit cards, as well as your overall feelings about credit cards in general. I do not push anybody that I know into getting more credit cards, but if they come to me and say that they're interested in getting more cards and they want to better maximize their spending habits or anything like that, then I'll gladly help because they came to me first and it was their choice. But there are going to be a lot of things that they should consider before applying for a new credit card, and I talked about the 8 most important things that I believe people should consider in this video over here, so go check that out if you're curious, or go check out this video as well where I talk about the all-important topic of when to pay your credit card bill. But as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.